Hello, everybody, and welcome to Talent Smart EQ's LinkedIn Live series, Emotional Intelligence for Your Everyday Life. We would love to know where you're joining us from, so over on the right side of your screen in the comments, just let us know where you're calling in from. Before I introduce my guests, let me ask them to tell you where they're in from. So, Alicia, where are you from today?
I am in Manhattan, so New York, New York, in my
Excellent.
office actually, so in Hudson Yards.
And I love the background. Everybody can see it's like she's the Today Show host sitting with everybody walking in the background, which is
It's not a
fabulous.
fake background. You'll see people walking, so it's not a
Yeah.
real in the office.
And Taryn, where are you today, Taryn?
I'm in Charleston, South Carolina.
Excellent, excellent, very good. I see some people out of Sweden first in the house. I love it. Thank you for being here. Some New Hampshire, Delaware, Indiana. We got Cheryl in Belmore, New York. That might be, I'm not sure how far. And Syracuse, New York. We got a couple other jumping in from Chicago. I see several names from Chicago.
Oh, Haiti.
Yeah, Haiti
Ontario.
and Ontario, Canada. Philippines, Denmark. Love it, love it. Keep on joining. As we're going through today's discussion, please feel free to throw your questions over in that comment section, as well as any comments that you have about what we're talking about. We have a terrific discussion today. It is about how to successfully manage and lead constant change. And I'm sure that we all have change going on somewhere, so this is probably going to resonate with everybody. Before I do introduce my guest, I want to remind everybody that Talent Smart EQ is the world's premier provider of emotional intelligence assessments and programs around the world. I, by the way, am David Brzezowski, Director of Training for Talent Smart. Our company is based in San Diego. I happen to be in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And I think this is the first time that we've had all three of us on the East Coast at the same time. So it's kind of nice. We're all like, right at 1 o'clock in the afternoon here on the East Coast. Thank you for those of you joining us from a lot of different time zones out there. I think South Dakota and Scotland, more Sweden, Zambia. Love it, love it. So let me introduce my guest today. First up, Alicia Steinman. She is the Metro New York City Office Managing Partner at Ernst & Young. She's responsible for the management of Ernst & Young headquarters and the largest offices in New York City, as well as office over in Hoboken. Alicia leads more than 13,000 New York City area professionals. And I'm also going to add that Alicia is the first woman to hold this position with Ernst & Young. And we'll talk more about that a little later, because I would love to hear that journey. You're coming on a year anniversary, so that's pretty exciting. And also, just to add one more thing, she serves on multiple boards in the greater New York City area. And in her spare time, she has run 25 marathons. I'm exhausted.
Actually, 26.
26 now. Not that anybody's counting, but I'm exhausted just thinking about your life, Alicia. So I can't wait to talk to you about that. Taryn is also joining us. She is our Executive Vice President of Client Solutions and Marketing here at Talent Smart. Coming up just a couple of days away, I believe, from your third anniversary with us. That's correct, right, Taryn?
Yep.
Exciting. A vast career thus far in leading very successful teams in both sales and marketing, and kind of like many people, not just doing her career, pursuing your PhD in organizational leadership at Anderson University. Pretty exciting. Thank you both for being here. So let's get started and let's talk about change management. It is not a new subject by any means, but when we think about it in the sense of managing and leading constant change, I think it kind of has a little bit of a different meaning. So Sharon, I want to start with you. When you think about managing constant change, what comes to mind? I mean, are we talking about like that one change after another, or are we talking about multiple changes at the same time?
Yeah. So, I mean, the first thing that came to my mind was the pandemic. We all went through a pretty challenging collective human experience where we were getting bombarded with news and information that was constantly shifting and changing and evolving almost daily. And it was interesting because it was happening at both the macro level, when you think about national rules and regulations, but also at the individual micro level, at our workplaces and our schools. And so when humans experience this type of constant, relentless change, it can be really unsettling and unnerving. So when we think about change management in the workplace, people often think about these big events like layoffs or acquisitions.
Right.
And the leaders might all think, "Shoo, okay, we got through that big event. It's time to move on." But they're often not thinking about all the cascading impacts of that macro change at the individual micro level. So one big change, like a company-wide layoff, can lead to a new boss several weeks later, which might lead to new goals a few weeks after that, which could then lead to new daily metrics. So even though it was just one big change, at the individual level, it can feel like this relentless ongoing change. And if you think about it, it's really hard for your employees to show up 100% engaged, motivated, and like ready to go when they feel so unsettled. And so that's why intentional change management is so important.
Yeah, that's a great call, because I think that is the place that sometimes when it's leading change, that we do forget about how it's even affecting the people who maybe aren't having to make it happen, but having to experience it. Alicia, I can only imagine the types of changes that you deal with at Ernst & Young. You know, what makes this such a compelling topic of discussion? I mean, like we said, we've always dealt with change at work and in life, yet I feel like this topic comes up more and more often all the time.
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think I'll build off of Taryn. I mean, the pandemic was really hard. So I've got, an office in the middle of Manhattan, which, as most of you know, was on the news every day for being very, very impacted from the pandemic. But I also have, 13,000 people to manage, most of which, a lot of them started during the pandemic or thereafter. So it was very interesting to have, a majority of your workforce that started in an office that they never reported to. So talk about having to try to build a sense of community and an inclusive work environment when they're not here. It was very challenging. So we were in Times Square, and we all left the building saying, "See you in 2 weeks," and never returned to that location. We had we were going to move to 1 Manhattan West already, and we made the decision pretty quickly that we weren't going to go back into Times Square. This is, we weren't going to refigure for the spatial distancing and everything that was starting to come out. So we had to adapt and flex and then try to open this building, this one that I'm in now, early. And so we were able to come in a little bit early, and give people a lot of optionality on coming in, whether they felt comfortable, right, coming in, whether they felt comfortable using public transportation.
Yeah.
So, some of the things that we did at EY, which was amazing, was we started allowing people to expense their travel expenses coming into the office, expensing dog sitting, babysitting, childcare, because these were all new and changes that, a lot of people got dogs during the pandemic, things that we didn't think about and were sort of hindrances for people coming in. And we've actually continued that. And so now it's just part of our regular benefit program. So,
wow.
Yeah, that's an interesting concept. I mean, like, to think about what you had to do, like, okay, we couldn't just do it for this and say, okay, now no more. And so, yeah. Taryn, I think you were going to chime in on something there.
No. I was good. That's really cool that you guys were able to keep. All of
I love
that
you changed that.
Yeah.
So I'd love to get your take, both of you, on the difference between managing change and leading change. Taryn, how do you define or separate the two, or is there a separation in your mind?
Yeah. So I think there's definitely a separation. When I think about managing change, I think about the self. So it's about figuring out the specific strategies and methodologies that you need to cope with all the changes happening around you. So it's managing your own reactions, your own coping skills, which is always step one. And it's obviously super, super, super important. Yeah. But when it comes to leading change, that is much harder, because it's not about you anymore. It's not about how well you're coping with the change. You might be doing fine. You might have seen it coming from a mile away. It's about how the people around you are coping with that change. What will this particular group think about the new leadership team? How will this team be impacted by the merger? How will this person react to this news? So each person has a different resiliency threshold. So as a leader, you've got to make sure you're accounting for all those different variances on your team.
Yeah. Alicia, what do you think about that? the difference
No, I
between you.
think he's exactly right. And I think, even thinking about technology and where pre-pandemic, I don't think many of us did Teams or Zoom calls. And
True.
so we sort of all adapted. You've got to sort of know your audience, and some people don't feel comfortable on camera, and you sort of have to understand that. Some people don't feel comfortable coming in the office, so you still want them to be included, so you allow that video option.
Yeah.
But you have to be flexible and understanding, but you also have to understand, like, what's the goal here, what's the best option for everyone. But then also encourage people who don't necessarily raise their hand and have a voice. So that's a big focus of mine is, the people who normally in the room would be the one raising their hands in a virtual and hybrid environment. That's really challenging somewhat to draw some of that out from people who are on Teams all the time. And you don't want them to feel excluded. And it doesn't mean they don't have something to say. It just might be not the environment that they feel comfortable in.
Yeah, that's very fair. I love, Tiffany, your comment on here about change fatigue is real.
Oh, yeah.
Would you like to respond to that?
I literally wrote that down. Yeah.
I have so many people that have said to me they have Teams or Zoom fatigue.
Yeah.
Because we always challenge them, make sure you're on camera, make sure you're on your camera, just because we know that you're present and contributing. And a lot of the feedback we get is, I have Zoom fatigue. I just don't want to do it anymore. And you think about that and you're like, it is kind of like, you're like, okay, I'm being broadcast all day. And so you want to be really mindful, and you have to think, is it really necessary? We used to do a lot of, conference calls. Do you need a video on this one? And sometimes the answer is it's the right thing, but sometimes it's not. And so you want to be mindful and understanding of people.
Yeah, that's a great call. And I think, Taryn, with us here at Talent Smart, one of our challenges is when we do classes that Talent Smart does virtually. When you're talking about emotions, it's a lot easier to do than when I see faces and body language. But I mean, like the fatigue of people wanting to turn it on one more time becomes a real challenge out there. Taryn, what do you think about that comment? Because I think it's so valid what she said.
It's so valid. And it's one of those things that, again, it's not really commonplace. Like, one of the things I think is crazy about Zoom is how you can see your reflection. That's not normal. When you have a conversation with someone, you should be able to, you don't hold a mirror there and see your reflection. And so there's just little nuances that, in this new world that we all have had to adapt. And it's so funny because, Tiffany, I also wrote down a note about change fatigue, and you're so spot on. And really, we've been it's just been relentless, really.
Yeah, absolutely. So let me talk to you both about how you have both managed and led. What are some of the successes, like maybe best practices that you've seen that has worked for you in leading and or managing? Alicia, what would you share with anybody that's been some best practices for you?
Yeah. So interestingly enough, I actually fear change. And if I go back, like my parents were here, they would be like, oh my gosh, I was that, and I'm a twin. And so she lives right by Taryn. She was always the one who was a little more, she was ready and she did not fear change. I got so filled with anxiety the night before I went to kindergarten. I literally got physically ill and went to the hospital. My parents thought I had appendicitis because my body literally just shut down. I was so nervous about starting kindergarten. I missed my first day of kindergarten.
Wow. That's dramatic.
Now I lead EY, and my day is never the same. So I think there's, throughout my whole life, I've always sort of feared change. But then, you kind of have to stop and say, what exactly am I fearing here? Like, what exactly is the worst case scenario here? Like, let's take a simple example. This webcast. Some people have a massive fear of public speaking, and you just go, what's the worst that's going to happen? Okay. People don't, it doesn't resonate. People don't, maybe I mess up a few words. Like, that's okay. You know what? I think it makes you more authentic. I think it makes you more real. And I'll tell you, people, people they don't want to see your Instagram filtered, perfect, edited, pre-scripted self. They want to see the person that they can relate to, who also makes mistakes. We all make mistakes. So I think for me, it's just sort of taking a step back and thinking about what's the worst that can happen. And then also having some things that really ground you and that, are really important to you, that are constant in your life. So I run a lot, as you said. So that's sort of like my Zen time. And that's where I sort of process and like think through my day and what I have to accomplish or what I need to prioritize. And to me, that's my constant. And then my family is my constant. So everything else, as long as I have those sort of like pillars and those, goalposts, if you will, everything else kind of just falls into place. And when you wake up in the morning and I run and I go home at night and, I've got my family there, anything that happens in between is just the day. So I try to focus on that, but yeah.
Well, I love that because it is setting yourself up, and that, like, from when I look at that from an EQ perspective, self-awareness is so important to understand what is it that allows me to not freak out about anything that's changed. I mean, let's face it, when you were going to kindergarten, you had really not a lot going on except for like toys at home, right? Like playing outside.
Right.
So, I mean, now you're able to have a little bit of a focus. I love like the grounding things that you're running, you're working out, but having family. And I think that's a great win for anybody who's listening, is thinking about if change is not your friend, because we all know that many of you have said this in the chat, change is inevitable. We know it keeps on happening. So I always find it amazing when people freak out that another change is coming. That could be the opportunity for you to start saying, well, how do I keep myself grounded? Taryn, I mean, kind of the same question to you, but really maybe bringing in some emotional intelligence strategies that maybe you have actually done best practices to be successful with.
Awesome. And before I answer that, I do think it's interesting that I'm also a twin, and it was my sister.
That is so bizarre. I did not realize both.
Yeah. And
That's
she's the anxious one, which causes me anxiety. Yeah, having to deal with that. That's a whole separate podcast. So
that's right. We'll do that again.
Yeah. But no, when I think about EQ, in my experience, if a leader attempts to manage and lead change without some kind of foundation of EQ, I can almost guarantee that it will fail at some level. And I'll give you a perfect example. You might think that's overstating it, but I'll give you an example. So EQ really shows us that we experience things emotionally before we can process them intellectually. So think about that. When you experience a moment of change, like going to kindergarten, or for some of you, I don't know if my colleague is on, but she just sent her daughter to preschool for the first time today. So Katie, if you're out there, this is for you. When you think about a moment of change, even if that change is positive, your first gut reaction is shock or fear or confusion. So it all happens before your brain has fully processed all the ramifications of what that change means. So even if it makes perfect logical sense to, let's say, undergo layoffs, every single person in the organization is going to feel that at a visceral level before they can process it intellectually. So if a leader comes walking into the room and jumps directly into, hey, here's the new workflow, and here's the new org chart, and here's all the new processes that we're going to adopt, they will have completely missed the boat, because everyone will walk away still feeling confused and disengaged and unaligned, because the leader failed to address those basic emotional needs of, security and comfort and trust. So a much better way to approach the situation is to start with the emotions. Ask your people, how are they doing? How are they feeling? Help explain the why behind the change. And then really listen to them and acknowledge their concerns and fears. And that's what builds trust and engagement. When we talk about human-centered leadership, it's that connection to allow everyone to move forward with the change. You hear about psychological safety. That's a great example of what we mean here. It's about building that foundation of safety, security, and stability so that your employees can thrive, and so that's it for me. That's the key for me.
Yeah, well, and I love that whole piece about asking people how they feel about the change. I find a lot of times, so I facilitate our programs around the world, literally, and I find that the biggest thing that leaders who are challenged with leading change well have not wanted to ask, how do you feel, for fear of what the answer is going to be. And I think that that's a place where we need to get a little bit more comfortable to say, just give it to me. So I know where to actually spend my energy, because some people might just say, I don't have enough information from the change, as opposed to I don't like the change. So, because that's a big difference, right? It's like not liking it's one thing, but not understanding what it is. And that's why I think sometimes the change management aspect of it in a large corporation can be one of those challenges. Like, did everybody get the right message? So I wanted to ask both of you, like, how do you measure success when it actually comes to managing and leading change? Because, I've worked in corporate world for many years before joining TalentSmart, and the best places that I saw was whenever there was a plan to say, not only are we going to communicate it this way and then keep on going in depth, but then we're going to make sure that we follow back up to measure it too. So Taryn, give me your first thought on how you think about measuring success.
I would measure successful change by establishing some sort of baseline and then having routine check-ins. So obviously one-on-one conversations are perfect, but pulse surveys can be great for this. You could do something in SurveyMonkey, even small organizations, and you can ask questions like, how engaged do you feel at work? Do you feel that there's good alignment? Do you feel like we're headed in the right direction as an organization? So maybe do that before and then after the change and see, what the differences are. And, just having an outlet for people to be able to express their thoughts and feelings can actually really help everyone embrace that change.
Yeah. Alicia, how about for you?
Yeah, I think, I think what Taryn said was really, really spot on about, recognizing the emotions first. I would say though, that leader has to be empathetic, and they have to be, they have to actually want to hear the feedback, because a lot of times we'll hear from our people, well, they asked me how I'm doing, but I could tell they didn't really, I didn't feel like they cared. So I do think it's super important to understand the emotions, but you have to listen. And a lot of times as leaders, you'll have a preconceived, like, this is the reason that we're doing it. For example, layoffs or whatever that may be. They have a reason of why the business is doing it. So they think they understand the emotion behind it, but they're not listening to the person who is explaining why it's so impactful to them in a very different way. And that they may be two different things, but you have to understand one, and then you have to acknowledge it, but you also have to feel it, right? So the business decision may be one thing, but the emotion attached to it may be very different. So I think it's really important to acknowledge it, but also understand it. We do a lot of surveys, to Taryn's point. We do people pulse surveys that we do for our people, and they are anonymous, and they're on a whole variety of topics and subjects. And then we compare the data actually to last year's results. So how happy are you at the workplace? And you can compare it to last year. How do you feel about your leadership? And it's all anonymous. So it gives us really, we can splice it and we can actually look by region, by city, by level, and really hit on pain points or identify maybe a group that we're obviously just missing the mark, or a city where we're missing the mark. And then we can adapt and sort of think, all right, how do we address this particular issue, whatever it may be, that the scores are lower than we anticipated or were lower than we want them to be.
Yeah, that's a great call out too. I mean, because I think that you have, if you do the surveys, you've got to be able to then say, okay, what are we going to do with this data that we just got? Yeah, I mean, a couple of great comments in here, Zala. I love that you said about expressing thoughts and emotions will make people be more resilient. That's such a true statement. It's like whenever you're able to say it out loud, I mean, and I think also to Alicia's point, like you've got to be really, I think, authentically empathetic when you're doing that. Otherwise, it comes off so fake that it's probably better to not pretend, because I would rather my boss not say anything that would probably turn me off more if that was the case.
Exactly. We do a lot of training and for empathetic leaders. And it's exactly to that point, because it's actually very detrimental to an organization if you have a leader that is listening, but not hearing.
Yeah.
So very different. And it can have the opposite effect on the people.
Absolutely. So both of you are women who have, I'll call it, demanding lives and careers because of everything going on. So if that was the only place that we were talking about, it's like what's going on at work would change. This could be a little bit of a different conversation, but you both are mothers. You have outside interests, including serving on boards, being active in the community. And as I mentioned at the top of the show, Taryn is pursuing her PhD. So there's a lot of stuff around every piece of your life. So how do you manage all the different changes that are happening in the various aspects of your life? Because I'm dealing with different people in each of these. So I'm curious as to, what tactics are you, Lisa? Alicia, I'm going to start with you because I've read your bio and I was exhausted after I read it. I took a nap. And then, so how do you do that? Because you're dealing with so many different people in so many different changes that I'm assuming that you cannot use the same tactic exactly.
Can't use the same tactics, but there's a lot of overlap, right?
Yeah.
So I think the first and foremost, the most important thing is to set boundaries.
Okay.
You need to set boundaries, and you have to sort of separate work from personal, right? Or whatever that other piece may be, whatever your prioritization is. And then you have to ebb and flow. It's never going to be perfect. But I find when my oldest was born, it was really important for me to be home to do bedtime and to do, story time before we went to bed. And I remember, so I would have to leave at like 6 o'clock at night. And this was when we went in every day because he's 13.
Right.
So I remember those days. So, but I remember I would get so stressed because I would have this 5 to 6 o'clock meeting every day that always went late. And I just felt like when I was in the meeting, all I was thinking about was, I need to get home. I need to get home. I need to get home. And then when I got home, it was, oh my gosh, what did I miss after that? I need to get back on. I need to get back on. I need to get back on. And I felt like I wasn't present for either. And it was so incredibly stressful. So I finally said to the partner I was working for, I think I was a manager at the time. And I said, it's really important for me to get home to see Leo for bedtime every day. And he looked at me and he said, well, Alicia, there's just going to be some days that you just don't get home, and that's okay. And I looked him square in the face and I said, that might have worked for you, but that's not going to work for me.
Yeah.
And it's very important for me. Now, he didn't mean any offense. It was just in his family dynamic. His wife was at home and sort of covered all that piece. And he, when he got home, he got home. And for him, it was, if he stayed later, he was not to come home because then he would interrupt bedtime. Right. And I said, as soon as I said that to him, he kind of like took a step back and I startled him. And he was like, you just never thought about it from my point of view. Yeah. And I'll tell you, every day after that, even to this day, like we would do meetings at 4 o'clock and he would, Alicia, you have to go. You have to go.
Oh, that's awesome.
And he goes out of his way to support me. But it was it's awareness, right? So don't think your perception of what your boundaries are is the other person, because they might have a very different boundary. And now I try to do that in my role. I'm the person that's here every day. I'm the person that's in the office. I'm the person that people look at and say, she's leading the office. If I'm setting the boundaries and I'm getting home from my kids, you can get home. If I'm going to the gym or this or whatever, you can too. So I think it's really important to set the boundaries, be respectful of those boundaries, but also be accountable to those boundaries and yourself.
Yeah, that's so nice. Is that you really just kind of put how we talk about relationship management and emotional intelligence in like that whole conversation. We talk about a needs model, and it's important to understand what are the needs of people, especially when change is happening. I think that sometimes we look at change and say, well, this is just how it has to be, but there sometimes can be those little tweaks that don't interfere with the success of the change. Exactly like you were saying, Alicia, of, me being home at this particular time is a need of mine. And maybe it's not of yours. So needs don't necessarily align from that personal perspective. But we talk so much about this when we have our classes together, and I sit people down and ask them, come up with what are your needs in this relationship. Like sometimes we even ignore our own needs in those dynamics too. What about
and I'll tell you that since the pandemic, when we have people that come and say, I'm leaving the firm, I sit them down, I say, like, tell me why. And a lot of the times it was, well, because I really wanted to do this cooking class, or this was really important to me. I started biking during the day during COVID, and I don't feel like I can do that anymore. And I always ask them, I'm like, well, did you talk to your supervisor and explain to them about how important this was to you, but also have a plan of, hey, I'm going to be out for 2 hours during the day. I'm going to work late, like be accountable to it. And most of the times they're silent. It's kind of festering and they're upset about it. And then it gives them anxiety, but they never raised their hand and said, this is a need I have. and here's how I'm going to make sure I'm accountable, but also I need your support. And then you ask that person for support. You get that board of directors, you get that support and that mentor that then is your champion later on.
Yeah, absolutely. I love Kawana is kind of just singing your praise in there about, I just told a coworker that she has to know her needs before she sits down and talks with
Yes.
her EVP. Yeah.
Yeah, because if you don't know what they are, it's sort of like going to the grocery store without a list. You walk out with Fritos. It's like,
it's so true.
That's awesome.
You have to know what your needs are, but you also have to. So one, it's knowing your needs, but two, it's having a plan. So sometimes people come to me and say, "Hey, I want to go to the gym every day during lunch, or I want to take a cooking class, or whatever it is," but they don't have the plan to how they're going to accommodate their schedule or get their project done or whatever. So you want to go in with your needs, but then also be accountable and have your plan, because that shows that you're being proactive and otherwise you're going to them with a problem. You're going to them with a solution, which is very different.
Yeah. Great call.
I love that.
Taryn, what about for you? I mean, mother, like EVP, you're also going back for your PhD. Like, how do you manage all the different changes that come up?
So as my husband and family and friends will tell you, I have a crush and crash strategy. So I crush it, and then I crash and burn. So it's not really working too well. No, in all seriousness, there are times where it does get to be too much, when work is super stressful and you pile on just the mental load demands with, managing kids and soccer schedules and dinner every single night. It gets to be a lot. And so those are the times when I realize I really need to take a step back and slow down. A lot of us have this kind of go mentality, and sometimes we just have to stop and rest. But it's so hard. I love, Alicia, what you were saying, because, we try to show up 100% to work and then 100% at home. And sometimes there's days where you just feel like you're kind of failing at everything. So my advice, and it's funny because Alicia and I did not talk about this, but I completely agree with Alicia that you've got to find something that grounds you. Because when we feel like our life is spinning out of control, again, it can be incredibly kind of comforting and calming to have some type of routine or ritual or a healthy habit that you really love. We're actually launching a new book next Tuesday, Dr. Travis Bradberry, called Emotional Intelligence Habits. And we talk about these micro behaviors that might seem small, but can actually make a huge difference in your life. So it could be running, like Alicia over here, who runs, marathons, or it could be art or music or yoga or just taking a walk out in nature, but creating some kind of stable daily habit that can ground you can really help when you're in the midst of constant change.
Yeah, I love that, Taryn. And I will say, one of my best practices is I'm known for, I take time off whenever I need to take time off. And I don't mean like, without it, I'm kind of sitting there like I have times like, even if I just can get a long weekend, if I know that I'm like kind of burning candles, because change is exhausting too. And so sometimes you're putting extra energy and effort into whatever the change is, that all of a sudden you realize, why am I just like, I need like a mental break. So I'm off tomorrow, by the way, so in case anybody's looking for me, I'm off. Because I just spent 2 weeks of traveling. Last week I did classes in Denver, Colorado. We just certified over 30 people to do our programs, and that takes a lot out of you. And then I traveled all the way back. And then continued working with what I'm working on, as well as some things that are going on in my personal life that were exhausting. And I was like, I need Friday off just to be able to have like a redo for myself. And I think that's the kind of thing, know your needs. Like I need to do that every so often just so I can recharge. And I think that that's okay. Like ask the boss. I read a couple of the comments in here about talking to your boss is so helpful to just say, this is a need of mine. I need to do, Layla, I think that, yoga helps you a lot. Absolutely. Yes. Whatever it is, it doesn't have to be anything major. It might just be something that allows you to just do that recharge, that's simple there. Taryn, for you, any other things that you can think of from an emotional intelligence strategy? I mean, since we talk about strategies all the time, that you might throw out there.
All right. So this is one of my favorite all-time lessons ever that I've learned about studying emotional intelligence. And it's this: when change is happening to you, instead of thinking to yourself, like, man, why is this happening to me? Why am I getting bombarded? Why am I getting blindsided with change after change? Like, why does this keep happening to me? I want you to shift the question in your head to this: what is this trying to teach me?
I love that.
What is this situation trying to teach me right now? And just that subtle shift in your perspective versus feeling like you're the victim of like being blindsided, change after change after change, and why is this happening? Just shift your perspective to what is this trying to teach me? And that will help you increase your ability to kind of adapt and grow even when there's changes happening all around you.
Yeah, that's great. Love that. Love that. I think we don't do that enough from the positive side. We always go to the negative side. Yeah, I think that's a great call.
The only thing I would add, Taryn, I would say what challenge is it? Like what's the opportunity? Also, I mean, when change is happening, like when you think about the toughest things that you've gone through, there's always a massive opportunity. Always. So it's not why is this happening to me? Like you can just change your focus, but also look for that opportunity because maybe there's something there and you just gotta be brave enough to give it an to give it a try.
Yeah,
that's such a great point. And I think that goes along with kind of this mentality of, kind of this reactive, like, oh man, all these changes are happening to me. And instead just kind of switching it to, to your point, Alicia, like, how can I embrace this change? How can I, find the positive? How can I, improve the outcome? So yeah, I love that. And it's all, that's the whole trick, is just kind of shifting that, perspective. In terms of how you're handling the change.
Yeah,
absolutely.
I don't know if anybody watched the Netflix special on quarterbacks, but like Patrick Mahomes on there he talks about how he wanted to be a baseball player his whole life. And I mean, his father played for the Mets and that was his whole dream. And, he had some sort of injuries and someone suggested he played football. And I mean, look, he could have said this, oh my gosh, this is a totally different sport. I don't want this. This is, something I don't want, but look at him now. Super Bowl. What an opportunity. So I think you have to sort of pivot and look at things and, without your little glasses on.
Yeah, so true. I love a nice best practice that Missy Clark just shouted out. My mental hack is to always have something refreshing to look forward to. Keeps me from feeling like there is no break in sight. That's a good one. Love that. Yeah.
I also, did you see, if you look in the chat, Megan says, she says, how can this be the best, worst thing that happened? So I love that.
Yeah.
That's a good one. Yeah. I mean, it's just great mindsets to put yourself into as opposed to in the negative. Yeah. So Alicia, I wanted to come back to something we talked about at the beginning. So you're the first woman to be named as managing partner here. First off, big congratulations, because you're coming up on 1 year anniversary. That must be exciting. So that's a change in itself, right? I mean, tell us a little bit more about the journey, how you've managed the change for you, in that whole personal adventure, like if you don't mind, because I think that the journey is fantastic.
Sure. Yeah, sure. So we have other office managing partners who are female before me, but so I'm the first to lead our U.S. headquarters. And it's interesting because I was not the obvious choice for this role. I'm an audit partner by day, so I work on a lot of different clients, but I started doing a lot of things sort of outside my day job, if I say it right. I started doing a lot of initiatives, sort of things that I were very interested in and I felt very passionate about. And I started doing this thing over here and this thing over here and this thing. So I got really, really involved in a lot of things, New York City, a lot of things around education, a lot of the things on our corporate responsibilities and communities and things like that. And everyone said to me, not everyone, but a lot of people said to me, why are you doing all those things? Like, they're not directly your responsibility. They're nice to have, but they're not getting you anywhere in the group that you are in. In fact, it's like all this extra time you're spending on things, and it's not, you're not getting credit for it, I guess is the best way to say it.
Yeah.
And I wasn't doing it for credit. I was doing them because I really enjoyed them and I was really passionate about them. And I knew it was the right thing, that I just really enjoyed it. So I think when you do things that you're passionate about, I think it's very authentic. People know that you're not doing it just for a check the box. So when my predecessor retired early, so it was funny. I had told him like 3 years ago before he retired, I said, when you retire, I want your job. And he was like, okay, ha, ha, ha. But he retired 8 years early. So like, I really thought I had a lot more of a runway to prepare myself.
Wow.
But I sort of building these bricks, if you will, or foundation. And, when I raised my hand and said, I want this role. And I was not the obvious choice. It's never gone to a female. It's never gone to anyone under 50. So, but when you looked at all the things that I had started to do, everyone's like, oh, well, she's actually really qualified for it.
Yeah.
And so, I went through the process and ultimately was chosen. So I'm very thankful for that. I'm very grateful for the opportunity. I also had a really great leader who was making the decision, who said to me, you're young. And I know that most people think you're too young, but you know what? I think if we don't give people opportunities when they're younger, they don't really have a runway to do anything. There's no incentive for them to do any or make any real change. And I think you're going to make real change. So I'm going to give you a chance. So I say to people now, I'm like, everyone who told me I was crazy for doing all these other things now go, oh, okay, now she's
now it makes sense.
That's right.
That's awesome.
But you got to do things that feel good in your heart. When you're doing something that makes sense and is honest. And when you try to fake it, people know it. When you're just there to meet that person, or you're just there to check a box or say you were there, people know it. It comes through. Yeah. So use your time. We don't have that much time. Spend it on things that you enjoy and that you're passionate about.
Yeah, I love that. I wanted to give you an opportunity. Is there anything that's coming up in your world that you support, that you you're in New York, anything that anybody could help you support out there?
Oh man. So we are doing a bunch of things coming up, but one that we're doing, we're partnering actually with all the other Big Four firms. We are doing a Broadway sweep. So there is a huge movement to clean up Broadway. So companies and volunteers can pick a day, a time, and sweep on Broadway to clean up. It goes all the way down from, Brooklyn Bridge all the way up into, all the way up to, Washington Heights and above. So it's block by block volunteers. And so I think something like that is really cool. It's an opportunity for us to, as, a bunch of EYers and a bunch of other Big Four come together and actually sweep and clean up the cities.
That.
That's awesome.
But also come back to the city. If you guys haven't been to New York, I know the news portrays it in one way. It's hustling and bustling. Like all the restaurants are open. When people come here, they're like, "Oh, I didn't realize everything was back like this." And I'm like, it's just different than a little bit different on the news, but enjoy it. It's such a great city. But so that'd be my
awesome.
suggestion.
Thanks for sharing that. And I will be back at the end of September. I'm going to be down there. So
cool.
Excited to be back. Yeah, absolutely. Well, Alicia, Taryn, thank you so much both for sharing your perspectives today. I think it's so great to just hear the change doesn't have to be scary, that it is something that you can manage and lead. And I do want to remind everybody who's joined us, thank you so much for all the comments and the questions. And if any of our discussion has you interested in wanting to learn a little bit more about emotional intelligence for your organization, do not hesitate to reach out to us. Our producer is going to drop our information into the comment section. We look at emotional intelligence as a helper to any solution you're looking for. So we are global and we'd love to be part of that solution. We are going to be back, by the way, on September 28th with our next Emotional Intelligence for Your Everyday Life. We are going to be discussing the secret to building diverse and inclusive everyday worlds and in your work culture. And that's going to be coming right as we get into October's Global Diversity Awareness Month. So it's a nice kickoff into that. But first, we have something really exciting on September the 13th. And Taryn actually alluded to it before. Brand new book that has been penned by none other than Dr. Travis Bradberry, one of the founders of Talent Smart. It is called Emotional Intelligence Habits. Taryn is going to be sitting down with Dr. Travis Bradberry talking about the new book, and we're going to give you a sneak peek into something great that's coming a little bit later in September, a public workshop. Please join us for then if you can. All that information can be found on our website. But until then, we hope that you join us again. And remember that EQ is for your everyday life. We'll see you next time.
Thanks, everyone.